Welcome back to the deep dive. Today is Monday, February 2, 2026. We've got a huge stack of sources here: market reports, economic data, Fed transcripts, and we're going to tie it all together under one central theme that I think explains the chaos.
Which is the risk of the crowded trade.
Exactly.
That is the red thread for the week. Because whether we're talking about silver or big tech investors or even, currency traders in Tokyo, we are seeing the exact same pattern. When everyone piles into the same bet, when the whole world is on one side of the boat, that exit door gets very, very narrow when the music stops.
I love that image, the shrinking exit door. But before we get to the scary stuff, and there is some scary stuff, let's start with the good news, or at least the confusingly good news.
Right. We got some data from manufacturing that, it shocked pretty much everyone.
It did.
And to understand why, you have to remember that for a long time, manufacturing has been the sluggish part of the economy. The expectation for the ISM manufacturing number was 48.5%.
And just for clarity, in the ISM world, 50 is the magic number, right?
Correct. That's the dividing line. Anything under 50 is contraction, the sector's shrinking. Over 50 is growth. So the market was braced for another month of shrinking.
You're ready for bad news.
And the actual number came in at 52.6%.
Wow.
It's a massive beat. It just shocked everyone on the upside. It means we're solidly back in growth territory, and it's actually the highest level we've seen since the summer of 2022.
So factories are back. They are humming.
They are absolutely humming, and it wasn't just that one number. We looked at factory orders up 2.7%. Durable goods up 0.2%. I mean, these are key indicators that the industrial cycle, the engine room of the economy, is revving up.
So if you just looked at that data,
You'd say, wow, the U.S. economy is on fire.
okay, so we're back in business, champagne corks popping in Ohio, but this is where the whiplash comes in. You look at how people are actually feeling, and it's a horror movie.
That is the dark side of the data. We got the Conference Board Consumer Confidence Report on Tuesday. And bad doesn't quite cover it. It crashed to 84.5.
Put that number in context for us. Is that just a bad month, or is that historical?
It's historical. It is the lowest level in over a decade. But here's the stat that really blew my mind, and I had to triple check this.
Right.
It is lower than the reading in April 2020.
Wait, April 2020.
April 2020.
Let's just pause on that. In April 2020, we were wiping our groceries with disinfectant wipes. The entire global economy was shut down. We didn't know if we'd ever see the inside of a restaurant again. Unemployment was skyrocketing. And you're saying people are more pessimistic now?
According to this survey, yes. And that is the paradox we have to wrestle with. We have factories churning out goods at record paces, but the people who are supposed to buy them are apparently terrified.
So what's the disconnect? Is it just vibes? Or is there something tangible hurting them?
Oh, it's tangible. It seems like inflation is the ghost haunting the machine. We got the PPI, the Producer Price Index, on Friday.
Right, that's wholesale prices.
Exactly. Before it hits the store shelf, it rose 0.5%, and core PPI hit 0.7%.
Which is the highest since last summer, I think.
Right. And since PPI is often a leading indicator for what consumers pay later, this suggests that maybe those rising tariffs we've been hearing about are finally starting to bite.
So people are feeling that pinch, even if the headline numbers look good.
It's the difference between the economy on paper and the economy at the kitchen table.
Which sets up this really fragile dynamic. The industrial engine is revving, but the consumer engine might be stalling. And we're all waiting on that December retail sales release. That's going to be the truth teller, isn't it?
That is the million-dollar question. Sentiment is bad. People say they are unhappy. But is their spending actually bad? We don't know yet. But it creates a very dangerous setup.
And speaking of dangerous situations, let's talk about the referees of this whole game. The Federal Reserve, they had a meeting last Wednesday. What did they make of all this?
They did what they usually do when the data is messy. Nothing. They held rates steady. No surprise there. But the vote was interesting. It was 10-2. We had Waller and Mirren actually voting for a cut, but the majority said, let's wait.
And Chair Powell sounds like he's trying to be the calmest guy in the room.
He really is. He used the phrase, outlook has clearly improved. He's looking at that factory data and basically saying, look, the economy isn't collapsing. We can be patient, meeting by meeting.
But here's the wrinkle. And it feels like a plot twist where the hero loses their map. The Fed says they are data dependent. They need data. But the U.S. government went into a partial shutdown last Saturday.
Right. And usually markets kind of shrug that off. But the direct consequence here is that the agencies that collect the data are closed. The Friday jobs report, the single most important piece of data the Fed needed, delayed.
So they're flying blind.
Essentially. They're sitting in the cockpit trying to land this plane, trying to balance weak employment against stubborn inflation, and precisely when they need the instrument panel, the lights went out.
Talk about bad timing. And to add more drama, we have a new character. President Trump nominated Kevin Warsh to eventually replace Powell. What's his vibe?
This is a fascinating development. Kevin Warsh is not your typical pick. Historically, he's considered a hawk.
Meaning he likes higher rates, hates inflation?
Generally, yes. He's pledged to shrink the Fed's balance sheet, which is a tightening move. But, and here is where it gets really interesting, he has this very specific thesis about the future.
Which is?
He believes we are on the verge of a massive productivity boom driven by AI.
Ah, the AI savior narrative.
Exactly. But the economic logic is, if AI makes everyone hyperproductive, companies can produce way more stuff for less money.
Which is naturally deflationary.
Right.
So even though he's a hawk, he might not feel the need to crush the economy if he thinks the robots are doing the work on inflation control.
Precisely. It's a supply-side argument. It's optimistic.
How did the market react to this? Did they freak out?
Surprisingly calm. Investors only slightly raised their expectations for cuts. The probability of getting more than 50 basis points of cuts in 2026 is sitting at about 29.5%. Most people still think June for the first cut.
Microsoft reports earnings. They beat on earnings. They beat on revenue. By any normal standard, that's a win. But the stock drops 10%, the largest drop since 2020. Make it make sense.
It's all about the gap between good and God tier. When a stock is priced as high as Microsoft was, good is not good enough. You need to be spectacular.
You need to be perfect.
Perfect. Think of it like Olympic gymnastics. If you're the favorite to win gold, a tiny wobble on the landing isn't a small mistake. It destroys your score.
And what was their wobble?
A tiny blemish. They reported record spending on AI infrastructure, which cost a fortune. But the growth in their Azure cloud sales was slowing down just a tiny bit.
So expenses are skyrocketing to build the AI, but the revenue from it isn't accelerating quite as fast as people hoped.
That's it. Investors looked at that and said, wait, we are paying for infinite growth. When that story cracked, the sell-off was aggressive.
And the scale of this is wild. Microsoft was the world's largest company for most of 2024. Now, fourth place, behind NVIDIA, Alphabet, and Apple.
The number that stunned me was the market cap loss. They have lost nearly $1 trillion in value since October 2025, from $4 trillion to $3.1 trillion.
A 22% drop, $1 trillion, gone. That's the GDP of a country like Switzerland, just vanished.
Poof. And that is the definition of a crowded trade unwinding. Everyone was piled into this big tech AI trade. It felt safe. And the moment the story got a little complicated, everyone tried to leave at once.
It's brutal. But it wasn't just tech, was it? The broader market seemed to react to that factory data we talked about earlier.
It did. If you held stocks last week, you were mostly flat, but the type of stocks mattered. Growth stocks like Microsoft were down, but value stocks were actually up 1.1%.
Because value stocks are companies that actually make stuff in the real economy.
Exactly. They are tied to the manufacturing cycle.
No.
So when the ISM number was good, value stocks rallied. Investors are rotating from hope to reality.
But if you think a 10% drop in Microsoft is bad, we have to talk about Friday's commodity crash. I actually had to double check these numbers. I thought they were typos.
They were jaw-dropping. I refreshed my screen twice.
Gold down 9%. Silver down 26%.
In one day.
One day. That is the largest single-day decline in the history of silver. What happened? Did we find a mountain made of pure silver somewhere?
No, nothing fundamental changed. This is purely a financial phenomenon. Think about the run-up. Between October 2025 and late January, silver had risen 140%.
140% in a few months. That's crypto-level stuff.
It was a rocket ship. Everyone piled in. It became the ultimate sure thing. Hedge funds, retail investors, you name it. But when a trade gets that crowded, it's just unstable, like a Jenga tower.
Right.
All it took was a tiny catalyst. The Fed didn't cut rates, and the U.S. dollar recovered about 1.5%.
That's it. That's all it took to cause that.
That's all it took to trigger a 26% collapse. Because it wasn't really about the dollar, it was about leverage.
Okay, explain that, because leverage is a word that gets thrown around a lot.
Well, a lot of these traders buy silver using borrowed money, margin. So when the price dips even a little bit, they get a margin call from their broker.
Put up more cash right now or we sell you out.
Exactly. And if they don't have the cash, the broker sells automatically. That selling drives the price down more, which triggers more margin calls for other people.
It's a cascade. A death spiral.
It's an avalanche. And because everyone was on the same side of the boat, everyone was buying. There was no one left to buy on the way down.
It's the crowded theater yelling fire, and the door is the size of a cat flap.
Precisely. And this brings us to what might be the biggest risk on the horizon. The crowded trade that makes silver look like a drop in the bucket.
You're talking about Japan.
I am. The Japanese carry trade.
Okay, let's unpack this, because carry trade sounds like something you do with luggage, but it's actually terrifyingly important. How does it work?
The concept is pretty simple. For years, Japan had interest rates at basically zero. So if you were a big global investor, what do? You borrow money in Japanese yen for free.
Free money. I like it.
It's a cheat code. Then you take that yen, convert it to dollars, and invest it in something that actually pays a yield, like U.S. Treasury bonds or U.S. stocks. You pocket the difference.
So I borrow at 0% in Tokyo, invest at 4% in New York, and keep the profit. Sounds like a money printer.
It has been a money printer for a long time, trillions of dollars. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. The trade relies on two things: Japanese rates staying low and the yen staying weak.
And let me guess. Those things are changing.
They are changing fast. Look at the Japanese 10-year government bond yield. In 2022, it was 0%. Today, it's 2.24%.
That is a massive jump in the bond world.
It is. And as those yields rise, the yen naturally gets stronger. So now you borrowed yen when it was cheap, you have to pay it back, but the yen is more expensive. Your debt just got bigger.
So the free money is now costing you money.
Exactly. And here's the scary number. Japanese financial institutions hold $6 trillion in foreign securities.
6 trillion with a T.
And about half of that $3 trillion is in U.S. assets, U.S. stocks, U.S. bonds.
So if this trade unwinds, if these Japanese investors decide, hey, I can get over 2% at home now, safely, and they sell their U.S. assets to bring the money home.
That is the sleeping giant risk. That's huge selling pressure on U.S. markets. If it happens all at once, the exit door for that $6 trillion trade is going to be incredibly small.
It really connects back to everything we've discussed. The theme of the week is just complacency is dangerous.
It is. Whether it's assuming Microsoft goes to infinity or silver goes to the moon or that Japan will keep rates at zero forever, the markets are punishing assumptions right now.
So let's try to pull this all together. We have an economy that looks great on paper. Factories are back, but feels terrible to the actual consumer.
Right.
We have a Fed that is stuck, flying blind without data, and possibly getting a new boss who loves AI but hates inflation.
Correct.
And we have financial markets that are absolutely ruthless. If you are in a crowded trade, you are at risk.
That is the summary. And I think the key takeaway for anyone listening is to just look at where the crowd is. When you see something skyrocket 140% in 3 months, you have to ask yourself, who is left to buy?
Right, because if everyone's already bought,
The only thing left to do is sell.
that's a great point. It's about looking around the room and counting the exits.